Hey, Mike. How are you?
Bob, I'm swell. How are you?
Uh, Exhausted. we
Yeah,
have,
I'm hip. I'm hip. I didn't
uh,
want to move at all when I got back from Baltimore. I just wanted to lie there.
yeah. So we're gonna
Great,
spend.
great show, though. Great show.
It
And
was great. We're gonna spend.
hat's off to everybody involved with that show once again, because I've never had a bad time there.
Yeah, we're gonna spend some time talking about it. And for those watching, Mike and I were both at Baltimore Comic-Con this past weekend. He had a booth, signed a bunch of books. We did some panels together. He did some panels alone. I did some panels alone. And I wanted to talk about the exhausting time I had there. It was wonderful. And you said something to me about that. It's the show that by the end of it, you're exhausted, but you don't want it to end.
Yes, yes, and I never feel that way. By the time a show is over, I'm like this really old man, and I'm pooped. And I was pooped Sunday at Baltimore, but I didn't care. I could have done more.
Yeah, no, I do want to. People will see this at some point, but I do want to say that we do have a first comment at on this show from last night, and our former guest Will Dennis wanted to be first. So,
Sherry beat you to it.
well, Will's is actually first. He's hers is just the first one that I posted up there for us. But as I said, we had a fantastic show, at Baltimore. And what I think it got started off right with this picture of all of us. This was the first comics reunion, essentially, which was a great, amazing assemblage of talent and bald heads. And
Grell's actually older than me. Why does he look younger?
I don't know about that. He does. Okay. He's it was a great show. And Howard skipped out before we could take the picture because he'd had enough. It was quite an experience. It was a long show.
Howard had a mic drop at the first comics panel.
He did. It was and it's funny because one of the things that he talked about was how we all love comics. The reason that everyone is in the room, he uses the word enthusiasts. He doesn't like the word fan, but they're enthusiasts, and we all love comics, and we should embrace that, and we should celebrate that. And then he added Howard stuff to it, but it was still wonderful, and really it was great. It was great to see everybody. It was great to talk about the origins of First Comics and how long it's been since that began.
It was wonderful. I'm going to identify the folks in this photograph.
Sure, do that.
Everybody who's gawking at it now may know everybody who's in the picture. On the far left, which I think is amusing, is Bob. You probably recognized him. Next to him is Mark Hempel. Next to him is Mark Wheatley, who is cleverly disguised as Lamont Cranston.
Lamont is much darker, I thought.
Next to him is Joe Staten wearing an original First Comics t-shirt and being able to fit into it after 40 years. That's
and
amazing.
jacket.
That's true. And behind him is Tom Mandrake. He's being coy. And next to him is Mike Grell, who looks like he's going to beat somebody up. He will not. He's more likely to just shoot you. Next to him is some really old geezer. Next to him is Mr. Steve Rude, the tallest man on earth. And next to Steve is John Workman. Just a fabulous group of people. As Bob said, Howard disappeared when I guess they thought that they might charge him for the microphone or something. Yeah. But he had a good show too. I know that. So this was fun.
It was a lot of fun. We did record it. I haven't had a chance to do it.
It was 40 years.
It's been 40 years, right? And we'll get back together when it's 80.
Yeah, yeah, sure we will.
Um, anyway, I do have it recorded. I don't know what the sound sounds like, but we'll see what we can do about it, and it'll be great if we can put that together and get that up. The next panel that I attended later on that day was this panel, which I'll the far left in the front is Torrin Grönbach, then me, then in the back it's Ron Mars, in the front it's Tom King, then Philip Kennedy Johnson, the very bald guy is Brian Michael Bendis, and the guy with the beard is David Pepos. And it was a fantastic panel. It was a great experience. We had a wonderful time. The concept was getting into character, and it was talking about the what it's like to write a character that's not your own, and how do you accomplish that by putting something of yourself into it, but also being respectful. And it was great because we were able to play off of, they've all written, a lot of them have written some of the same characters. We touched on the fact that Ron and and Brian have established legacy characters through different means and different expressions. And David is about to do that. David is going to be relaunching Punisher with the new Punisher. So
that's the one that has not been adopted by the far right.
it is the one that is not Frank Castle.
Right.
So it was really interesting, and it was a great panel because you know what, when you're at a convention and you're at a panel like this, when you have people and all of a sudden they start turning and asking each other questions and engaging in an actual conversation, and it turns into a round table instead of a question answer session, you have the right topic and the right people for the topic, and it did that, and it was really wonderful.
I think that's true. However, you also know that you have the right people for mud wrestling.
I'm glad we didn't have that. And then then we did this on Saturday. This was fantastic. I tagged
Great.
this juggling chainsaws, and this was our editors panel with on the left, from left to right. Is that right? I'm looking at left to right. I hope you guys are. Louise Simonson, Brittany Holzer, Jack C. Harris, myself, and you, sir. And what did you think of this? We haven't really talked too much about it, you and I, since we did it.
Well, that's because you and I shared a booth, and we were almost never there at the same time.
Right.
Due to very busy panel schedules and other stuff. I loved that panel. I loved it dearly. I've known Wheezy for almost 50 years, and this is the first time I've ever done a panel with her, which is amazing. Just amazing to me. Jack has been one of my closest friends since 1976. That it's always fun, just to sit next to an old buddy, because you know what lines to use, what words will like evoke a wonderful response. And the coolest part was meeting the DC editors, the next generation's next generation, and then coming home and reading Danger Street, which she edited.
Yeah,
which is great.
She's really smart.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's not surprising given the quality of her work. But
correct.
Damn, the coincidence is like the fates, pun totally not intended initially, but I'll stand behind it. The fates wanted to remind me, just how good she is. We know how good both the writer and the artist on Danger Street are. Right. Although that issue of Danger Street totally destroyed my brain.
Today's the issue 9?
Today's issue 9. Totally destroyed my brain. It was... I forget. I don't know the page count. 22 pages, I'm guessing? 24?
I think it's 22. I think because it's a black label, they go to 22. But
yeah, I think so. Who knows? I didn't count. Um, and it was a fight scene. It was like 18 of those 22 pages, give or take, were a fight scene, but it was also a philosophical debate. And it was a chess match at the same time. These two assassins are trying to outmaneuver one another psychologically, yet at the same time showing their growing respect for each other, even though we know that it's most likely one of them is going to make it to page 23.
Right.
Great,
I,
great
I,
issue.
I can't wait to read it. It's funny because we had that panel last year where we were talking about how it was coming. It was about to come out, and it's interesting because it Tom's best stuff is absolutely not necessarily his most commercially successful stuff, and that doesn't mean that his commercially successful stuff is not good. But when his best stuff, people seem to miss. I don't understand.
Oh, I could explain it.
Yeah, I'm sure we all.
But if you're the more commercially successful books are going to be featuring characters that are more commercially successful.
Right, sure.
And the better known the character, the less you can really do with those characters 9 times out of 10. You can't do anything really dramatic, like, have them grow a third arm and keep it. That's the hard part. By the end of the story or by the end of the story arc, he's probably back to 2 arms. But if you're doing something with characters that are less commercial, that are more unknown, if you will, you have much more latitude. And Tom found stuff in some of those characters. I mean, these were half of the characters in first issue special were stupid.
Well, the funny part is we mentioned it on the getting into character that like almost all of them, he is the second person to write them.
That's true. Oh no, that's mostly true. Yeah,
mostly, yeah, not all, but most of them. Definitely most of them. Nobody else wrote Lady Cop.
God no. As quite frankly, a lot of us are still trying to forget that.
I understand. So then Sunday morning, we did this. This was an experience for me. These are all very good friends of mine, and we did a 40th anniversary of My Little Pony, or 20th anniversary of G3 My Little Pony. Anyway, all these folks were writers and artists on My Little Pony. On the left, it's Katie Cook, and then me, and then on the Jesus pose is Andy Price, with his hands crossed is Tony Fleece, then Tom Zoller and Trish Forstner. And they are, it was an amazing time. I'll tell you, this is the thing. And maybe I was tired. Maybe I had been up too late the night before. But both of the panels that I had on Sunday, I brought a bit of emotion to me. And it has to do with how comic books affect everybody. I wasn't talking to you over here. You have to be quiet. I'm sorry. But anyway, this is the fact of how comics, are such a part of me and how they can affect people. One of the stories here about My Little Pony is they have incredible fandom. These people have dealt with so many different fan experiences where people are moved and by the characters that they write. Tom told a story about how he had a half an hour conversation with this young boy who is I believe autistic, and his mother came over and said he doesn't talk to anybody ever, and he just talked to you for half an hour about My Little Pony. And I think that's amazing.
That's a wonderful impact. And by the way, I admire how you talked about your emotional response to My Little Pony and to your panel. It takes a very secure man to do that. So.
Well, I will. Like I said, this was the thing. We had them there. We needed a moderator, and I did that. And I've never read a My Little Pony book, and I've never watched a My Little Pony episode. And these are all very good friends of mine. and I told them I will never do that to them again. So we can have another panel, and we will talk about anything but My Little Pony. So, and then we're gonna bring our guest in fairly soon. So we have one more panel that I had, and this one was tough. This one was very this was creating socially responsible comics in 2023. On the left is Jamal Igle, and then Tana Ford, Lisa Burdage, John Hazard, myself, and Mirka Andolfo. And this was good. I wish I didn't record it, for technical reasons or whatever. But I would do this panel again in a heartbeat. It was really fantastic. It's just an amazing concept about, and we had some good audience participation. I did convince Tana to read Legion of Superheroes.
You convinced?
Well, I was talking about it, and then she's like, "Well, you convinced me to read it, so we're gonna have like a read party." And I said, "Well, you should read like the first arc of Volume 3, and then you should read like the first 30 issues of Volume 4, which is 5 years later." And so she's like, it was pretty funny, but the reason is because the Volume 4. And I've written about this, and you can find it on Pop Culture Squad. There's it's the first same-sex superhero relationship in DC Comics, and it was not publicized. It was not official. I don't know that Paul would have been able to comprehend that, but it was under the radar. I've spoken to the creators about it. They're very proud of it, but it is absolutely, if you read it, it's not that subtle. I mean, it's subtle, but not that subtle.
You mentioned Paul.
Well, Paul didn't know what Keith was doing. Paul was, the president, I guess, at the time. But it was Keith who wrote it with Tom and Mary, who were scripting it.
Well, I mean, nobody really knows what goes on in Keith's head.
He does
wonderful stuff when he wants to tell it as a story. It's almost always terrific, and my favorite work of Keith's never runs more than like 6 issues. Before
Sure.
the public says, "What the hell is this?" My head hurts. Stop it. I love it. I enjoy the hell out of it. I think Paul would have done the same thing, though, had the times been different when he was writing it.
Sure.
And by different, I mean very different, both in terms of how Americans look at same-sex marriage issues, because it was not legal during his tenure, and also sort of the political impact it might have on the parent company, which, being huge and controlling so much of the media, is a shit magnet. So I understand why it couldn't have happened during his tenure as a writer, but if it was a different time, I think he would have done it.
Yeah, I'm not saying he wouldn't. I agree with you. I apologize for that point of it. But there's two really interesting things that happened in the panel. One was, we talked a lot about Jamal talked about Molly Danger, and we talked. Mirka was fantastic. Like she is a comics. She has comics in her blood, just like all the rest of us. Even though she grew up in Italy. And she was apologizing for her English, which was just fine. But she loves comics, and she loves to make stories, and she wants to tell her stories in this medium, and that's what she does. And it was wonderful.
And the comics field in Italy is wonderful and rich and big. They might produce more than we do.
She's she runs her own studio over there and is constantly pushing the envelope there. The other thing that was really interesting was concept with Tana, who is, has a marginalized experience. And she was talking about a book that she's writing where a lot of it takes place in Nigeria, and her writer is Nigerian, has these beautiful braids. And so she was drawing it and trying to be authentic about what she was drawing, and has a lot of braids. And the writer's like, there's too many braids. Like, I'm the outlier. My hair is not what you should be going off of. The people in Nigeria have different hairstyles. So you got to get rid of all these braids. And she thought that was, I thought that was cool. Like, just the fact of her going back and making the changes to accommodate, which was no problem for her. She wasn't upset about it. But like, trying to be authentic and trying to make sure that it felt right for the people around them. And I thought that was a big portion of what we were talking about.
Well, for you budding writers out there in Etherland, authenticity is critical. It's absolutely critical, because the minute you start writing something that about which you know nothing, and it's a real thing about which you know nothing, people catch on. If you're setting a story in Detroit and it's it has no feel for Detroit, no authenticity, no references to what really goes on in Detroit or any other city, then people are going to go like, well, they're not going to warm up to it, those who know Detroit. So that authenticity thing is really critical.
And I think
one more thought. If we're making it up, if it's phony science, which we do a lot of, then I quote Denny O'Neil, my favorite quote of Denny's, and there are many, which is, "It may be phony science, but it's our phony science."
Sure.
That's critical.
The last thing I wanted to say about that, and we're going to bring our guest in, was there was at the end of the panel, all the guests had left, and there were three young women who came up to me as I was packing up my stuff, and they were really questioning how to make things not that you are adopting somebody else's culture incorrectly. And they were very concerned. They're writing something. I think they're seniors. She said they're seniors. I think they might be seniors in high school. But they were so concerned that they didn't want to misappropriate something. And the culture that they're talking about is something I'm not familiar with. And I said, they've done a lot of research, and they how do I make sure that it's there? I said, well, you can do your research and you can talk to people and do the best you can to make sure you have a handle on it. But at the end of the day, write it, get it out there, get it done, so that you can correct if you need to.
Hopefully, once you've written it, you have time and the knowledge of a person who might know something about it just to look it over.
Yeah, but the thing is, I don't think that the culture that they were talking about has anybody who reads English or comic books. Like, it was a hidden culture that exists somewhere in the far jungles of some continent that is not this one.
Oh, because we got that here in Connecticut.
All right. Well, we've been talking about Baltimore Comic-Con all year. We've now completed it. We've done our first comics history, 40th anniversary. And I would have to say, while the wait was long, it may have been worth it, because it was just a fantastic time. We're going to shift gears here and bring in our guest, who is a fabulous writer, former editor, and an award-winning novelist. And we're going to bring in Alex Segura right now.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Alex. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me. Hey, Mike.
Hey, I got to tell you, since this is our first face-to-face meeting, I think.
Yes.
I mean, so Um, I really enjoy your work.
Likewise, I'm a big fan.
Oh, thank you. And there are reasons why I enjoy your work, and I hope that we'll probably get to one or two of them. Um, so far, I have been lucky on this SquadCast not having to talk with a person whose work or who personally I loathe.
That's good.
So that's really good.
I will try to make sure we don't do that.
I'm happy to continue that streak.
There's
Hey,
one.
Bob, good to see you.
There's one or two I'm willing to take on, but yes, I appreciate that. No, Alex. So it's real. When Bob said, "Hey, I think we're going to get Alex for the show when we come back from Baltimore," I immediately said, "Great," because
Did
we
you-
hadn't.
I'm flattered. That's great to hear. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It's funny. Again, I'm happy to bring the two of you together for the first time because you have somewhat similar careers. I'm not sure that you.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I will tell you that as a reader of stuff like Denny's Question and Mike's DC work, I always knew it was going to be a good comic if I saw Mike's credit in the editor box. So,
Oh, geez,
yeah,
it's so nice of you to say.
it's the truth. Yeah, thank you for all your work.
Well, you're welcome, and we may have one more piece coming down the road. We'll see.
That's
so
exciting.
You started your career in comics as in DC's publicity office. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, my first like full-time job in comics was at Wizard Magazine. I was an editor at Wizard for about 2 years, and then my background's in journalism, so I was working at a paper in my hometown of Miami, and at the same time, I was reviewing graphic novels for the newspaper, the Miami Herald, and that's how I got in touch with DC's PR department because they send you copies to review, and they hope you review them. And I was going on vacation. Yeah, they did. They did. I guess I don't know what the status is now, but
not as good.
I was going up to New York on vacation, and I reached out to my contact there, and I said, "I'll be in town. Do you want to just grab lunch or something?" And he mentioned, "We're actually hiring someone in this like middle management publicity spot. Would you want to apply?" So what was a vacation became a whirlwind like job interview. I remember sitting in Paul Levitz's office and not getting grilled. He was actually a very, very gentle interview, and but I got to meet all the execs and stuff. And then after that, I was moving to New York. So that was my first, I guess, full-time in the industry gig.
So you wrote for the Miami Herald.
I was like a copy editor, page designer, and I wrote graphic novel reviews. Yeah.
And thereby continuing the Herald's legacy of having comics fans, previously of my generation, working at the Herald.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you a quick Miami Herald story.
Yeah.
I'm at First Comics, so it's 40 years ago, and I get a phone call from the then EIC of the Miami Herald, and he says, "We want to do an American flag Sunday only newspaper strip."
Huh.
And I'm thinking, no, you don't. You really don't. But okay, I mean, let's talk about it. And obviously, it wouldn't work with just one newspaper unless Howard wanted to starve to death, which he's not good at. So
nor willing.
It didn't happen, but I think that was cool.
Yeah, that is a funny thing to think about what could have been. But yeah, that was my first gig doing PR at DC forever ago.
So Mike invented the PR department at DC.
I believe it.
I just told everybody I did, thereby inventing the PR department.
Willing it into existence.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then you shifted into editing. Did you do editing at DC, or is that when you moved to Archie?
No, I didn't do any editing at DC. I wrote a short Halloween, they had those Halloween special anthologies each year. So I wrote one. Mike Martz was the editor. And then after that, I hopped to Archie, and I oversaw their PR for a while. But at the same time, they were letting me write stuff. So I wrote a few classic stories, which were a lot of fun. And then Archie Meets Kiss was my big thing at that stage. And then I hopped back to DC for a short amount of time, and I didn't make the move to Burbank. That was around the time that they shifted the entire company. They had the big reorg, and everyone moved. People were given the option of either moving to Burbank or just finding another job. So then I went back to Riverdale. And that's when I did some editing. I edited some of the superhero stuff.
Let me jump in here.
Yeah.
About Archie. You did several of the rock and roll crossovers. I mean, not just Kiss. You did the Ramones.
Yeah.
The Archies.
By the way, thank you for that. And the
you're welcome.
B-52.
Yeah, that was a thrill.
Now, the Ramones just so happened saved rock and roll.
Yes.
Period. If not for the Ramones, we'd all be doing like Montevani marathons or something. And I thought the whole idea of doing, I mean, because Archie you can put into almost any time now. Well, I guess that's true for everybody. But I thought that was just perfect and kind of ballsy, because the Ramones have an image that is not the same as Archie's image, which is true for Kiss. But unlike Kiss, they're not around anymore. Their impact is. And I just thought that was a wonderful idea. What made you? This is the stupidest question I've ever asked. What made you think, hey, Archie, the Ramones, cool?
Yeah, I mean, it was really Matt Rosenberg, who co-wrote that one shot with me, and the Archies reached out and said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did what you did with Kiss, but with the Ramones? And I kind of walked him through the process, and he had a contact there. And we, like you said, it's different. When the band members are alive, you're dealing with the artists themselves. So with Kiss, we interacted directly with Gene and Paul Stanley. But with the Ramones, you're dealing with their estates or their various estates and whoever represents the Ramones brand. Right. So it was a little more, I don't want to say corporate. It was just a little more, I guess, mechanical. It was less about, like, you're not getting the pure vision of the artist. You're dealing with their, they're keeping the legacy in mind. So it's a different kind of mindset. One's not better than the other, but so we walked them through what it would be, and they were into it. And it's a lot like a licensed comic. You run the stuff by them, you make sure everything's approved at different stages, and you try your best to evoke the energy of what made those bands interesting to you. So I think with the Ramones, they do have some kind of bubblegum pop culture overlap with Archie, and so we focused on that, like this idea of two rockin' bands, and the time travel stuff was fun too. So it was and Giselle's just an amazing artist, so being able to jam with them was really great. Yeah.
Well, I really enjoyed the book, which is difficult because I enjoyed the concept so much that I had these expectations that would be very hard to live with or live up to, and by the time I was done, I was going like, yeah, that worked.
Oh, good.
Which is an editor's highest praise.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. And you never want the books, those kind of books, to just feel perfunctory, like they just happened and we printed them and we wanted to just succeed based on the concept. But I grew up reading Archie, so a lot of that passion's on the page, which hopefully translates.
And then with Kiss, you had Gene, who used to write for Marv Wolfman's fanzines,
right,
under his real name, or previously real name, I guess, along with like Leonard Maltin and Stephen King. Those are really interesting old fanzines. But what that means is that Gene, who I know and have worked with, is actually older than me.
Yeah.
And thank God for that.
Yeah, he was remarkably easy. I remember being anxious when I sent him that first script and just wondering how he was going to tear it up, but he just responded with good.
Personality.
Yeah.
He's
a businessman.
Well, yeah, but yes, and I agree with what you didn't say there, which is, well, he's a businessman. We're going to think as not normal human being. He's a businessman, and that's true. And he's a goddamn good one.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You brought this up, and it's something I wanted to get to, so I want to bring it up now.
Okay.
You have a lot of some of your work is licensed characters. You're creating whole arcs. It's not necessarily some of your novels that we saw in the video are full-length novels with licensed characters. Whether it's Star Wars, you do a lot of Star Wars work for Marvel these days, which is great. And how is writing licensed characters different from your original novels for you?
I I don't know if it's because I have a publicity and marketing background or a journalistic background where you're basically given a box. This is your sandbox. You can play with it. You can do whatever you want in this box, but you can't go outside the sandbox. And so the big difference is with my own characters, there's nobody that can say you can't do that. You can't do that to Pete Fernandez. You can't do that to the Dusk or the Black Ghost, like, because I created them or co-created them, and so they're my creations. Whereas with work for hire, whether it's Spider-Man or Green Lantern or what have you, or Star Wars, you're renting the character. You're being brought in because you've done well enough that they think you might be good at this, but you're not brought in to destroy the character or leave it irrevocably damaged. Somebody else is going to pick this up, and somebody else might pick up the threads from your story. Like in the Star Wars one shot I just wrote, I got to tee up some things that happened in the Poe Dameron novel, which was fun. It was just fun for me. It fit in the greater mythos. But the mindset is different. You're renting the car as opposed to having built it and driven it on your own. Maybe that's not the best metaphor, but and I think that's the challenge of what's that?
Because you can choose where you're driving.
Yeah.
As long as you go in the right way.
Right. So I think that flexibility, or being able to know that, this is a gig and it may be the only time I get to write this character. So I'm going to be, I'm going to contribute to this legacy, but it's not mine. And I think that's a challenge for some writers, I think.
Sure. Where did Pete Fernandez come from? Because there's 5 books.
Yeah, 5 books.
Is it? I'm behind. Are there more? Will there be more? Are you finished with it, or is that spoilers?
No, it's not a spoiler. I'll get to it in a second. But Pete showed up to me. I had just started working in DC. New York, as big a city as it is, can be very lonely, can be very isolating. You're surrounded by people, but you're still by yourself. So I was very homesick. And I also, I don't know if Mike, you can relate to this, but when you start getting every comic the company produces as part of the job, it takes a little bit of the adventure out of it, in that you have to read it. I had to read it for work. And so while I did love reading the comics, it felt less like a hobby. And that's wow, woe is me, comics became my job. It's not a complaint in any way, but I started reading mystery novels again as an escape. I started reading like Dennis Lehane and George Pelecanos and Laura Lippman and Walter Mosley. And I guess in the hubris of my late 20s, early 30s, I thought, well, I could do this. I want to do this, and I'm going to try to do it, but I want to do it with a Cuban-American character like me, someone I could have gone to college with. And I want to do it in my hometown. I want to do it in Miami, as opposed to, a gritty New York PI novel or LA. I couldn't compete with like Lawrence Block or Raymond Chandler, who defined those areas. And plus, Miami to me felt like the perfect contrast of like tropical weather and that very paradise-like veneer with this dark undercurrent. And so that's where it started. But I think for me, also with private eye novels, I like when the character evolves from book to book. I love Archer, I love Marlowe, I love all those episodic PI novels, but I have a real fondness for characters that screw up and kind of evolve and change, and each book is a little mini arc. So by the 5th book, I knew that I was bringing at least the initial arc of books to an end. Like, without it's been out for a couple of years, so I'm not spoiling too much, but Pete becomes a private eye at the end of the 5th book. He chooses that path. And so that felt like a nice note to leave him on. And I knew I wanted to work on Secret Identity and other stuff. He does show up in Alter Ego, which is the next, is the follow-up to Secret Identity, which I've only been very kind of judicious about sharing. But he does make a little cameo. That's a very meaningful cameo, but he's around. He's doing well. He's got a kid. And maybe someday I'll visit him again.
Mickey Spillane returned to my camera after quite some time off. Mm-hmm. And I think he even said that he was never going to go back.
Yeah.
He did that. And quite frankly, the first couple of novels I thought were brilliant and wouldn't have been half as good if he hadn't taken that long jump. So,
I think he needs his time away.
It's an arrow in your quiver.
Yeah, exactly. And what's funny is when I thought I was doing these books under the radar. They got some acclaim and some buzz, and I was happy about that. But I didn't get the most feedback I got was when I announced the series was ending. Like, people were angry. I was getting angry emails. Like, even other writers like Ian Rankin, who's a huge huge name in the crime genre, like messaged me. I was like, well, what are you doing? This is your this is your guy. Like so it was flattering, and he's always going to be important to me in terms of just my career and writing, but I have to have an idea too. I don't want to just crank them out to crank them out.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then you moved on to Secret Identity, which won the LA Crime Novel Prize. Is that right?
Yeah, the LA Times Book Prize, which
LA
was
Times
a
Book
huge
Prize.
honor. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And how did this book come about for you? It's more of a synergy of kind of, there's crime, but there's also comics, and how does that work?
Well, I was finishing up the Pete series, and I had written the Star Wars standalone YA novel, the Poe Dameron Freefall, which was fun. And for me, my favorite crime novels are the ones that take you in different places, to different industries or different settings, and really immerse you in this world that you might not be familiar with. Megan Abbott does it really well. She'll do like a noir novel about cheerleading or dance or science, and it's usually about two women kind of grappling in this industry or world. And I just thought comics would be a fascinating industry to show that, to have a murder mystery, to really play into the noir. I knew it would have to be a different era of comics. Like, it couldn't be today. I mean, it could be, but it would be more interesting to someone reading a comics that they no longer identified with. Comics today, it's everywhere. Like Ant-Man and Moon Knight, they're all part of pop culture, and that's a story unto itself. But I wanted to spotlight a time when comics was a very niche idea, like, this kind of thing that not a lot of people knew how they were made, or and when the industry itself felt like it was kind of falling apart. Before the direct market really picked up, before Comic-Cons were a big thing. You had the Phil Seuling shows, but you didn't have San Diego Comic-Con, these big pop culture mega events. But so I had that loose idea that I wanted to do a comic book murder mystery. And I remembered back when I was reading Cavalier and Clay in college, like 20 odd years ago, I loved the book. Obviously, it's classic, won the Pulitzer. But I remember reading it and thinking, like, I wish the comics were in the book. Like, I want to read the escapist comics that are so fascinating. Like, why aren't they in the book? And I just thought it would be really cool if somebody did that. And so I didn't think it was going to be me. But fast forward to cooking up Secret Identity, and I knew that it would be interesting if we not only followed this protagonist as she creates this character and then has to solve a murder to reclaim the character, which is its own little meta treatise on IP and character ownership, but also show the character, show the comic pages done in that 1975 style. So I reached out to Sandy Jarrell, who's an amazing artist who's done stuff for DC Bombshells and Archie. And I think the reason I reached out to him is not just because he's a great artist, but he also loves history. He loves comic book history. He does. He recolors like old Kirby art. He's just like into it. And so once I told him what it was about, he did a proof of concept page. I wrote a script for one page. I wrote up the first 100 or so pages of prose, and that's what we used to sell the book. We said, this is what it's going to be in terms of story. Here's the outline, and here is a sample page of what you're going to be interstitially dropping into the book. And so my editor, Zach Wagman at Flatiron, loved the idea, and we kind of went from there. But I didn't think it was going to be something that pointed back to me reading Michael Chabon like 20 odd years ago. But that's where ideas live. I did create a character called the Lynx when I was at the Herald the years before, and I never thought that would come into play 15 years later.
You mentioned something that just set off like explosions in my mind. Yes, you set it back in time before sort of the direct sales era and all that. And you're right, it was a more interesting time to set a novel, particularly any sort of a character development novel. But I look at it a little differently. Those cockroach capitalist publishers, those small, flying by the seat of your pants publishing operations, which always go out of business and leaves everybody, owing everybody money and stuff. And Lord knows I've been associated with a couple of those. That's wonderful. That's fodder. Because you're bringing a pre-existing noir to it, and yet you love that, know that, and your characters can thrive in that. So I'm very impressed.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and one of the things that I find fascinating, let me zoom out for a second. I thought, okay, I'm going to write the story set in comics history. I'm not going to need to do any homework because I've read all the books. I've read all those books. I've been in comics, but it became this very journalistic endeavor. I had to reread a lot of the books. I had to read, Tomorrow's and their library were really essential, just like the, Quality Comics archive, reading
Yeah.
history, the Jim Warren biography, like just spending time in, like you said, the little C and D level publishers, as opposed, Marvel and DC were doing what they were doing, and that's great. But I wanted Triumph, the company that Carmen works at in the novel, to really feel like one of those fly-by-night publishers, like similar to Atlas, minus the Goodman funding. But I wanted it. I love history. I love nonfiction, but I love fiction that weaves into history. So I wanted this to feel like something, if you squint a little bit, you can imagine that this existed. And I've actually had people reach out to me and say, I looked it up. I couldn't find any issues of the Legendary Links in the Overstreet Guide. And that to me is the highest praise, because it means like you somehow at least bought most of it, like you thought this could have happened. And that's the highest compliment the book can get.
Yeah.
It's on what? It's on Zestworld, right?
Yeah. Well, it's going to come out in print from Image. Right. And
when is that?
I think early next year.
Okay.
It's coming out through Syzygy, which is Chris Ryall's imprint.
Right.
And the idea there is taking those little excerpts from the novel and expanding them so you can actually buy the Legendary Links #1 with the same kind of motif and look, and read the whole story. And it'll be done completely in tongue in cheek. I'm the archivist. Sandy is like the color remaster guy, but it's still going to be credited to Harvey Stern, Doug Detmer. It's fun. It's kind of like what they did with the Escapist books. I'm not saying it's a unique idea, but I love living in that meta space.
No, you also got the right guy. I mean, his sensibilities are perfect for that type of era. Yeah,
just one of my favorite people in comics. Just super talented and super professional, and a perfectionist. Like I can always count on him to make sure it looks the way he wants it to look.
Absolutely. I wanted to turn a little bit, and we'll get back to some of your work, but can you talk about Zestworld? How is that?
Sure.
As a platform for you?
It's been interesting. I think Zestworld, when they launched, were kind of competing in that same Substack space where they would, give you a platform to send newsletters and, serialize comic books. And I think it's been great to have that hub. We launched The Awakened, which is a superhero murder mystery, co-written with Mike Moreci, who's a good friend of mine, with art by Dean Kotz, who has done stuff for Black Hammer and The Butcher of Paris with Stephanie Phillips. And really what we wanted to tell was a noir superhero murder mystery that evokes teams like the Avengers and the Justice Society and those classic iconic superhero teams without leaning too hard into the Watchmen of it all. It's not a deconstruction. Like, they're superheroes and that's what they are. But one of them's dead and we have to solve the murder. And so it's very much celebrating superheroics with a much darker twist. I think the thing we likened to it most was, the Brubaker Phillips Incognito series, which we both loved. And so we serialized that, and then we started serializing the Legendary Links, and it's been good. I think the response has been good. I think the challenge with newsletter comics is, it's different from reading it on your iPad or reading it on going to the shop and picking up a single issue. You're getting it in different bites. You're getting like chunks of 5 pages, and that's a different rhythm. Like, it's a good rhythm for like an Archie story. Like, you can do a story in 5 pages and it feels like complete. But in terms of sequential comics, I as a reader, and I realize I'm in my 40s and maybe I'm just not the ideal reader, but sometimes it's harder for me to kind of get into the rhythm. But I think once you set into a routine that your readers respond to, then it's really fun. And I think we'll have a print component for both books at some point. Like Image is going to do links, and we're almost ready to announce the print home for The Awakened. So I think the challenge in our marketplace now is to just make sure you're serving up your content for any potential reader, whether it's digital through Comixology, whether it's print through, not newsstand, but, comic shops or bookstores. That's the challenge.
Newsstands.
Yeah. I mean, the Archie stuff is still on newsstands, which is good.
You bring up an interesting point. I've struggled, I'm a little bit older than you, and I've struggled to adopt that style of chunk pieced serial. I will tell you The only Zest World, I'm sorry, the only Substack that I am a subscriber to is Kari Randolph and Joanne Starr's.
Oh, that's great.
and Sirens of the City, I tried to read in on the Substack through that thing, and I got through enough of it that I know that I really like it.
Yeah.
So when I knew that it was coming out in print, I'm like, okay, well, I can't wait to get the whole thing. I'm not gonna. I'll keep giving the money, but I'm gonna wait till I get it read. And it's wonderful. It's really, really.
Yeah,
good.
no, it's really great. I think it's a fantastic book. I think the challenge is when, as a reader, you have this expectation that the content is going to meet your needs the way that a traditional comic would, and it doesn't. I think you're basically becoming a patron to these creators.
Sure.
And you're reading them, you're reading the stuff as it comes through, almost in a behind the scenes kind of way. And eventually you'll get to buy the product as a completed book. And that's, I think, its most natural way of reading it. But I think the paid subscription, you're supporting them, which I think is great.
Right. And that's a lot of there are a bunch of people who function on Patreon that way.
Right.
Younger, not as wonderful creators who are not necessarily putting out books with the brick and mortar publishers and whatnot. And so it's interesting.
You're eliminating the middleman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The publisher and distribution process is much more limited in that form. The people who are subscribing to you are supporting you.
Right.
And that's a wonderful approach. It's still just another way to starve to death unless you really hit it. But comics is show business.
Yeah, and no one said it was going to be easy. That's the thing, it's and so that's the one thing I try to stick to, is try to be as flexible as possible.
Yeah, ask Jerry Siegel.
Yeah, exactly.
I know Mike's probably been waiting for me to ask this question since you came on, but can you tell us about the Marvel adult mystery series that you're doing the Daredevil book for? What's the concept there, and what can you tell us about it? 'Cause I know when it was announced, Mike was like, "They're doing this, and Alex is the perfect person to do it." We had this conversation off air.
Yeah, so I can't really get into too much detail because my book doesn't come out until I think mid 2025. I'm revising the outline just so you get a sense of where I'm at. But I think the idea was to put together name crime writers and have them tell adult meaning just not YA or middle grade, but crime novels featuring the street level Marvel heroes. And I think, me notwithstanding, the other two writers they got were, Lisa Jewell and Sean Cosby, S.A. Cosby, are both huge gets. And Sean is a huge comic fan. So having him do Luke Cage is a slam dunk. And Lisa doing Jessica Jones is really great. I've loved Daredevil. I guess I'm the most academic of the writers, in terms of just my comic knowledge. I've read every issue of Daredevil. I probably think he's probably one of my favorite Marvel heroes, at least in my top 4. And I really want to evoke the books that I love while having it be something that people can read and not feel like it negates anything that exists. The challenge of adding to the mythos is you don't want to negate anything or cancel out anything that came before, but you also want to add. So, the stuff that I've enjoyed is the Bendis run, the Brubaker run. Obviously, Chip's most recent run is really great, and Ascenti's run. And obviously, we all follow in the footsteps of Frank Miller when it comes to Daredevil. So it's really evoking that, but also doing something new that doesn't just feel like I'm in a cover band, and doing it in prose, which, I think writing comic book characters in prose is challenging because you don't have that visual connection.
But you have a playing field like in another. You have the reader in mind.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, you bring to it the structure that you learned from J School, from journalism background. We talked to Ron last week, who has that same thing. I have that same thing. Denny O'Neil got his start in journalism, as did many, many other folks. Murray Boltinoff, just to go back to the turn of the previous century.
Yeah.
And structure is critical to getting your point across, to establishing the story, hooking the reader. establishing verisimilitude, which is critical.
Yep.
So I think they got the right guy. Yeah, that's why I reacted to Bob.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I mean, Denny is like the North Star for me in terms of writing, comic writing, or just whatever, any kind of writing. I remember once when I was at DC, and you probably remember this, they would do those DVD extra shoots where they'd bring in a bunch of talent from past years to come and do interviews that would augment like the animated movies as like additional material. And then my boss at the time came by and said, "Do you have an hour to sit with Denny O'Neil? Because he's waiting for his interview." And I said, "Do I have an hour?" I mean, I'd spend the whole day with him if I could. And he came and sat in my office. I think this was probably like 2009, maybe. And we just chatted for an hour. And it's still one of my fondest memories of working in comics, or, sitting with Jerry Robinson while he was signing his, he did his biography, and it came out, and DC hosted a signing for fans and the staff to come and get it signed. And I was a PR person that was sitting with him and got to just hear the stories, just watch him in action, still like, well on in years, but still a super pro and so sharp. So I don't know, you mentioning Denny just got me onto that tangent, but.
Well, I had the privilege of dining with Jerry Robinson on many occasions, and he remembered them when I saw him about 10 years ago in Baltimore, coincidentally. Wow. And that impressed me, but my daughter was with me, and that impressed her, which means I owe him big time. Denny and I shared an office, the only office with a couch, for 3 years. And I've been fortunate in my life to have found myself in many, how the hell did I get into this room? Experiences, which is really kind of cool. But sharing an office with Denny for 3 years, my God,
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine the stuff you gleaned from him.
But I learned from that. And also, we did a pretty decent comic book together.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, the question is definitely atop my list. So thank you again for that. Yeah, I think Denny is like the high watermark, in terms of bringing that journalistic aesthetic, thinking thematically about his writing, but also not glamorizing the process. Like, he just cranked. He wrote really good stories. He thought about them, but he met deadlines. He was, a lot to admire there.
Let me tell you his technique. I've mentioned this on the SquadCast before, so I'll keep it brief. Denny and I would sit in our office and work out a story, and he would have the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story down. We'd be in complete agreement, and that's wonderful. Then he'd go home, which in those days was Greenwich Village, and he'd light up a big-ass cigar, which he couldn't smoke for the last few years of his life. He'd lit up a big-ass cigar and just took a walk around the neighborhood and worked out the missing parts of the story. And when he got home, he had the whole story down, and he typed it, and then screwed up the pagination. But that was because of the computers. He had a very hard time adjusting to computers.
Yeah, I mean, I
had the privilege of editing Denny's prose stuff over at Comic Mix, and that was great.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I do that a lot too. I take walk. I'm an outliner. I do take really long walks. I can't listen to anything while writing. It's just very distracting. I need silence, which is hard with 2 little kids. But in those moments of silence, I get the work done. But I do take walks and listen to music and kind of just try to work out the little kinks, because an outline can only do so much for you.
Right. And you don't want to turn off your creativity by slavishly following an outline. If some idea pops up in your brain, it deserves consideration.
Yes, you want to give it wiggle room. You want to let the characters breathe.
Exactly.
I want to. This has been wonderful, and we have a bunch more to get to, but I want to kind of throw this in at this point. But I want you to. I don't know that you're both aware that you both edited the same character.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I know this is one of your favorites, Mike.
Actually, what you have up there on the screen are pretty much 2 of my favorites.
Well, there you go.
That's cool.
So what? But I kind of want to talk about Black Hood. Like, how did you
Okay.
approach it, Alex? How did with Dwayne's take on it? How did that come about?
Yeah, when I came back to Archie, I didn't want to just come back as like doing publicity again. I mean, obviously, DC was moving to LA, and I couldn't make that move. I just got married. I was going to stay. I'm still married. I was going to stay in New York. And when Archie and I were talking, I said I'd like to learn how to edit, like start editing some books and kind of get my feet wet. I have a Rolodex of people I could reach out to, and so they said, okay, you can relaunch the Red Circle Heroes, which we eventually rebranded for the purposes of this as Dark Circle, with the idea being it's not an interconnected superhero universe. Like, they do exist in the same universe, but you don't have to buy the Web #7 to understand what happens in Black Hood #12 or whatever. And I wanted to treat it more like a network. Each comic was a show, and each show was a different genre, and each genre kind of scratched a different itch. And so,
Kind of like the Thunder Agents.
yeah, kind of. And Black Hood was going to be the crime show, the crime book, very dark and noir. And I remember I was on the train to Mamaroneck, where the Archie offices were, and I just thought Dwayne's the guy to do it. Dwayne was a friend of mine. We briefly had the same agent when I was starting out as a writer. He's a great crime writer, and I wanted to see him bring that vibe and cut loose on a comic book. I mean, he'd done a lot of comics work. He'd done Cable. He'd done X at Dark Horse. He'd done his own stuff, and I really wanted him to bring the aesthetic of his novels to a comic book. And so he relaunched the Black Hood with Michael Gaydos, who was a huge get from Alias, the debut of Jessica Jones, and just a super talented and super nice guy. And so I was really proud of that. And but you also want to do it having an awareness of what came before. So, the previous Black Hood iteration, I was a big Impact kid. I love the idea of it, of creating superheroes that were not just tied to the direct market and, were meant to appeal to new readers through the newsstand. I thought was a really smart idea. I think there were some challenges on the way, which I'm sure, Mike, you can speak to in more detail than I can. But I loved those books as a kid. I was always fascinated that Archie had a stable of superheroes, and I still am. I still really think
score of those stories I will tell you in person.
Yeah.
See, the thing is, it's a touchy subject with Mike because there's I love to hear him talk about this stuff. It was important to me. Like, the Impact stuff was important to me.
Yeah.
I really loved what you did with the Dark Circle stuff. I was so excited about what was going to come, and similar events, similar things happened there.
Yeah, the market didn't support it. I mean, what can I say? We did The Shield with Chuck Wendig and Adam Christopher, which was really fun. It was very much like a high octane spy thriller. Then we did, Hangman was a horror comic by Frank Thierry. And so, we tried different things. And then, I think it's really hard to launch superheroes in this market. And that's been a thing since time immemorial.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
But Black Hood, which I'll admit, no matter who did what with the character, has always been my favorite Archie superhero.
Mm-hmm.
But Alex Toth touched it.
Yeah, exactly.
Now I've worked with Alex after Carmine Infantino told me it was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And Carmine was right. Everybody told me that. I don't care. We got some stuff out of Alex, and it was Alex Toth. So screw you all. I don't care. We had Alex Toth. And he did some really nice work on Black Hood. He also, by the way, did a question story.
Yeah.
If you look at the Black Hood, you have Alex Toth, you have Tim Sale, you have Michael Gaydos. That's some high level art.
Yeah, Rick Burchett. I mean, we got Rick to come and do a fill-in for I think, Chaykin did one. We got Rick Burchett to do one. And in the Burchett one, he brings back the Black Hood, the other Black Hood. And so they interact, which was fun.
Right. When we did Black Hawk, Rick was drawing Black Hawk for me, and Marty Pesco was drawing. Rick actually took flying lessons on a Grumman plane, just like the Black Hawks flew, just so he would have the feel of that airplane when he was drawing it. Now, we all know some really dedicated artists who really do homework, but death-defying That's a good
Yeah,
one.
no, I think Rick's in a class on his own. He's just a really talented. I think he's still hugely underrated. I mean, the fact his body of work is so impressive, but he still doesn't get the credit he deserves. Like Cry for Huntress is one of my favorite Batman stories. That pairing of Rucka and Burchett, it's hard to top that. I was rereading Officer Down recently, and it still holds up really well.
Yeah, we talked a lot about him this past weekend. In other words, the day before yesterday.
Yeah.
I don't know what day it is or where I am.
No, that looked like a great show. I was sad to not be there.
That was just this panel I did with Joe Staten.
Mm-hmm.
Greenberger was the host of that one, and Rick came across the transom with a Michael Mauser story for Charlton's tryout book, where they paid you with copies of the book.
Comics.
Well, yeah, but that was a great idea. Certainly
floppies or collected editions.
I'm sorry?
Floppies or collected
probably
editions?
Floppies, I would guess.
No, we didn't have collected editions.
Yeah, no. So like the 12-cent issues.
Papyrus, man.
So 35 cents. Right? You could sell for 35 cents. A whole bunch of them.
Yeah, no, Rick is great. Great artist. Really nice guy in my few interactions with him in real life.
He really is.
Yeah.
He really is. And he lives in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Most human on Earth.
I saw him when there's this mystery convention each year called BoucherCon, which is...
Sure. You just did that.
Yeah, I just did that in San Diego, which is a great location. It's nice to be in San Diego, not for Comic-Con. I love Comic-Con, but it's definitely a different vibe. But the last time I saw Rick, I think, was at BoucherCon. I had a coffee with him and Greg, and he's just a hardworking, nondescript guy. He just does the work.
And beautifully, brilliantly.
Yeah, great storyteller.
Absolutely, one of the best.
I think we just became best friends, Mike.
Well, I want to talk about something. You've been doing a lot of work on this property, and what is your connection to Star Wars? You've been doing a lot of Star Wars.
Yeah, I did the Poe Dameron book in 2019, so it was like one of the early. It was a pandemic book, so it was a challenge in terms of promoting it, but that was fun. Mike Siglain, who's the head of Lucasfilm Publishing, reached out to me and said, we're looking for somebody to write Poe's origin story, and I think this was right around the time of the third movie in the most recent trilogy, where you get a glimpse at Poe being a spice runner. And I think that got a lot of people talking, like, well, why would Poe be a criminal? What's the story here? And so it was a perfect way to get teed up into the universe, because you're watching the movie, and one of the big questions coming out of the movie is literally your book. So, how do I answer that question? How do I keep the existing Poe fans happy? And how do I make an interesting adventure? And so it felt like an interesting puzzle to play with. But I really wrote a heist novel in space. It's a crime novel in the Star Wars universe. There's not a lightsaber in sight, which is not a criticism. It's just not really magically inclined. It's much more about the underworld of Star Wars, which I find really fascinating. And then after that, I think they were happy enough with that. And it just felt, it was really wild to go to the theater and watch the movie and see the things that are going to point people directly to the book, like just hearing about Poe being a spice runner. Zori Bliss, is a key character, the Kerry Russell character in the movie, and she's a key part of the novel. So that was fun to play with. And then, I did another short story for their middle grade anthology, so I got to do a Qui-Gon story, which was really fun. And then most recently, that one shot for Marvel, which is they're doing a series of one shots celebrating the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi, and so. They asked me to do one featuring Admiral Akbar, which how can you say no to Akbar, and Mon Mothma. And I really loved Andor. I thought it was a fun suspense, spy thriller set in the Star Wars universe. So I wanted to do something that was evocative of that. But also, since it's Return of the Jedi, I could play with Poe's parents, Kes Dameron and Shara Bay. And so that felt like a nice duality to the Poe novel. The cool thing about Star Wars is that the canon is across platform. So the novels weave into the comics, and the comics weave into the shows, and it's all one narrative as long as, it's a challenge, I imagine. But, they have...
It always has been.
Yeah. So, but it was fun to play in my own little mini corner of the Star Wars universe.
They've just started that concept over at Doctor Who. Dave is bridging all media.
Huh.
Now he's not controlling it, but he's overseeing it. And I thought that's an interesting challenge, considering the property started in 1963.
Yeah.
And so far, he's doing it. From what I've seen and what little I've read, he's doing it better than our previous employer did with their characters who were around in 1963. Because he's the guy doing it. It's his vision. There's millions of people writing it and drawing it for the Titan comics are part of that deal,
right?
And the audio adventures and stuff. But it starts with him, and he's the showrunner for the property.
Yeah.
So getting into Lucas land, that must be daunting.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that I think people assume, oh, you're playing in this very complex universe, you're going to have to follow these strict rules. And like I said, there's the sandbox, but they do want new voices, and they want people to bring their styles into this to kind of, diversify the content. They don't just want your novel to read like your imitation of a classic Star Wars novel. They want you to bring your voice and your style to it. So that was liberating, and being able to create new characters and adding to the mythos is the coolest part, because you hope that down the line, someone's going to pick up one of the toys you left in the sandbox and play with it. And that's pretty cool. In the same way that creating a character at DC or Marvel is cool, because you hope that down the line, somebody else is going to utilize them.
Right. Although there are some people, Jack Kirby, and I will say nothing bad, and I mean nothing bad about Jack Kirby ever in his entire life. But Jack didn't want to play in that sandbox. He wanted to create characters that he created. I get that.
He proved himself right.
But when people started his characters and use them and find them,
Yeah. His batting average is pretty high.
Wait, yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
I want to bring in a couple of comments here. Well, first of all, I don't know if you saw this one early on, because this is interesting. So this was posted like at 8:30 last night.
Oh, nice.
And I don't think he's watching. I don't think he's watching, but I thought it was funny.
Good old Will.
But this is a question from a lovely person. What's the biggest challenge as an editor? And I want to throw it out to both of you, because that person wasn't at the editing panel we had this weekend. And editing comics, what is the thing for our listeners and audience that you find to be the biggest challenge? There's one thing. Just pick one.
I wouldn't say it's so much a challenge. It's more what I was striving for, is you bring in the talented people and you let them do their job. I find that the biggest challenge is if you find yourself micromanaging, then you've done something wrong. If I'm rewriting somebody's work, or if I'm going over the art pages and having revisions done to the point where it kind of disrupts the flow of the comic, then I didn't do my job at the stage of bringing the talent together. And so that's why
right. Good for you. God damn, I have absolutely right.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you realize if it's not working, it's because you made the bad casting decision.
Yes.
The editor's job in a commercial operation is to represent the company to the talent, and represent the talent to the company, and represent everything to the reader.
Yep. And you're the internal advocate at the company. You're the one advocating for your talent. And you're the one advocating backwards, saying this is what the company's doing.
Ha! Yes.
That's awesome. That's great. I want to jump to another piece of your work, and I want to talk about this.
Okay.
So I loved it.
Oh, thanks.
I am a big fan of Monica's as well.
She's great.
She is wonderful. And George and Ellie won Ringo this weekend.
I was very happy to see that. She is
and Taylor is a good friend as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where did where did this idea come from? How did it come together with such a great cast of creators?
So Monica and I first met on a podcast called Lethal Lit, which was YA crime podcast that I co-created and co-wrote, and Monica came in before we started writing the episodes to help flesh out the episodes. And so we wrote the first season of that. We created the characters, and it was on iHeartRadio, and we had a great time. She's an easy collaborator. She always brings great ideas. She's really a vibrant person. She has a great knack for character and voice. And I like to co-write. I think it's a fun way to see how other people do the work, especially in comics. Like, you see how somebody puts a script together or what their strengths are. I had co-written stuff with Matt Rosenberg, who's an old friend of mine. I've co-written with other people. I think it's really an interesting way to jam. And comics are like being in a band. You're like throwing stuff together, and you hope that the end result, you hope that the end result is better than what you individually bring to it. But I had an idea for, I obviously love street level superheroes like Daredevil or Moon Knight or Batman. And I love PI characters, like private eye characters struggling to overcome their own issues to do what's good, like the Tainted Knight, Marlowe. Flawed people trying to do their best despite their own hangups. And so I had a loose idea, and I went back and I sent it to Monica, and I was like, would you want to jam on this? We had just finished Lethal Lit. We were looking for something else to do together. And so we started fleshing out the world of the Black Ghost, which evokes classic things like, the fictional city, the legacy character, but puts a little twist on it. She literally sees the Black Ghost get shot at the end of the first issue. It's not a big spoiler. It's the turning point of the series.
Yep.
So we played with the tropes, instead of Gotham, she's in Creighton, which is a Baltimore-like city on the Eastern Seaboard. Yeah, exactly. So it's little things. Yeah, she's from Baltimore. So she's, little things like that.
I have actually, can you see it? Yeah, right there. That's Monica Gallagher's right there. That's Be More Into Comics.
Yeah, totally. And so we had an artist, we were locked in, and Comixology Originals, Chip at Comixology Originals had given us the green light. And then the artist, for whatever reason, couldn't do it. There was a scheduling conflict. There was nothing bad. Mm-hmm. And we had to scramble a bit, but that's how we found George Cambadeus, who's now doing Gargoyles and Dynamite. Everything. He's all over the place. He's doing Flash covers. Yeah, he's the perfect mix. He's got the three boxes that you're happy if you just check off two, like nice, fast, and good. If you can check off two, you're going to keep getting work. But he's all three. He's very easy to work with. He's very fast, and he's very good. And so we were off to the races, and we got to do 2 volumes, like about 10 issues worth of comics. We have an idea for a 3rd volume. It's just a matter of finding the time, then finding the publisher, and then making it work.
Sounds great. Yeah. Have you read it, Mike? Did you get a chance to take a look at that one?
No,
I recommend it.
No pressure.
No. It's on my pile. And the only difficulty is that my pile is electronic.
Yeah.
It's like, I have these files here somewhere. Where are they?
Yeah.
So, between that and how we watch streaming television now, my life is like 52 card pickup.
Yeah. Whatever jumps out at you first.
Whatever jumps out, No, but you want to give everything their appropriate amount of time and space, particularly because of the writers. You want to give the writer a fair shot. That's why I won't watch, like 5 episodes of a show all at once, because I'm not doing the writer or the story a service in my mind. Other people, you youngins, you were raised that way. Yeah. For me, it's like, no. Life is a 15 chapter Republic serial.
Yeah, exactly.
What were the first comics that you read that you remember reading? It's one of our standard. Let's delve into.
That's a great question. Yeah,
nerddom.
The first comic I ever had was a Benny and Veronica double digest. I think it was issue 13 or 14. It's got a great Dan DeCarlo cover of the girls in a nightclub or dance or whatever. I think my mom got it for me at around age 5, just at the checkout line, and that was really what kind of taught me the language of comics, this blend of like images and dialogue and captions, and I was hooked, and I became an avid Archie reader. And my first superhero comics one of my first was a Batman Brave and the Bold issue, Jim Aparo, and it was Batman and Aquaman. There's this cover of Aquaman like holding Batman in a headlock, and he's got like the scuba mask on, but it's falling off. I had no idea what was going on, and the good thing about Brave and the Bold is that it had no continuity to speak of. It was just like whatever Bob Haney really wanted to write about at any given time, and whatever hero he wanted to throw in. So it was really fun. My first Spider-Man comic was a reprint of Spectacular Spider-Man magazine #2, which for my money is one of the best Green Goblin stories ever. It's got Romita, Stan Lee, that chilling opening sequence where George Stacy is showing this movie, and you see Norman Osborn shaking and sweating because he's seeing these visuals of the Green Goblin, and he's then remembering he's the Green Goblin. And, Romita obviously drew pretty people, but he was an amazing storyteller and could, it scared the hell out of me. I think it was like maybe 6 or 7, and it was a digest. So I thought it was going to be like an Archie digest, but it was definitely not an Archie digest.
I had the original in my previous collection, and now I've reacquired it. It's in magazine format.
Buying it at the stands at the drugstore, discovering it. It's like, wow, this is color now. It was black and white. And now they have color like the comic books do. It didn't matter. I was going to buy it no matter what. It could have just been in orange. It didn't matter. I would have bought it. And it was a great story.
It's a great story. I reread it recently, and it just holds up. It's just a great classic Spider-Man story. And and 2 more that I'll mention really quickly just to prove a point. Everyone says, oh, every issue should be an introductory point for new readers. My first X-Men comic was Uncanny X-Men 238, which, if you recall, is in the middle of the first Genosha story. Claremont is peaking as Claremont. It's got Wolverine has lost his powers. Rogue is there, but she's lost her powers, and Carol Danvers is controlling her body. The X-Men don't show up fully as a team until page 15 or so. I had no idea what was going on. I had no concept of what was happening. I knew Wolverine. I knew that Cyclops used to be an X-Man. I just loved the Rick Leonardi art. I loved that these characters were cool and doing the right thing, and I just didn't know what it was. And then an issue of Avengers that Ralph Macchio wrote, which now, in retrospect, I know he picked up because Roger Stern had just been let go, and he had to kind of scramble to piece things together, but it had John Buscema art and Tom Palmer inks and a giant robot on the cover and Namor and the Black Knight and Mara.
Oh, is that Terminus?
Yeah, it was the metal, that crossover with all the giant robots, which was like candy to a kid. Like, okay, superheroes fighting giant robots. I don't care what else is going on. Like, I'll just read this. So,
you couldn't do better than that. That combination.
Yeah.
They could have sewn a $50 bill into each copy.
Yeah.
And that would have not made it better.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just kind of proves the point that as readers, we want to be in the medium. We don't necessarily need to have everything answered out of the gate. Like, I didn't need to know who all the characters were. I could think, okay, this is a cool character. I'm going to stick around to find out more about them. And I think some of that is a little bit lost.
Yes, I agree.
There's another reason why I asked that question, because I need to gauge your age.
Oh, I'm 43.
No, I don't. I just needed to gauge your age as a reader, because we, one of the things we do with our guests is we, if they're of age and if they've read first comics, we like to talk about what your experience with first comics is.
I was a bit. I mean,
you're a bit young.
Yeah, I was young. I mean, I have gone back and read like American Flag. I'm a big Nexus fan when drawn by Steve Rude, obviously. No offense to like anyone else that drew the book, but you're there to see Steve Rude drawing it. Sure. It's kind of, it's a fun like space opera. Those are the 2 books I gravitated to the most.
That's
just
great.
Over the years. Yeah.
That's great. I'm going to bring in another character, Carl, because you kind of mentioned something, and you and I geeked out a little bit online.
Okay.
And I'm going to bring in this image.
This is your life.
Do you know who it's going to be?
I'm not. I have no idea. Oh, nice. Yeah.
Oh.
So apparently, one of the creators of it does not like this character.
Really?
Yeah, like a lot. And so we're for anybody who's not watching and just listening, we were talking about Rachel Summers, now Rachel Gray, but the second Phoenix. I love that character, and
I think she's great.
I think she is. I think she was, the way that it was introduced and the way that I read the stories. And this is kind of an interesting concept. And I don't know if you've had this. I completely was caught up in her struggle from her lived experience of how damaging that was, and now her current place when she first came back in time to this time that was not her time, and how everything that she thought was true was not here. It was tragic. And apparently the creator thinks it's a throwaway character. Like, I don't care about her. So
Are you talking about the artist? Because certainly not Claremont. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, for a throwaway character, a lot of time was spent on that character.
He spent a lot of time on a lot of things.
Yes.
That eventually he might get back to someday or another.
Yeah, no, I love the character. I think I think a lot of the post Dark Phoenix Claremont stuff is very much a reaction to that, like filling the void of Jean Grey in some way. And, you have Madeline Pryor, who I think was in some ways Chris having a stand-in for what he wanted Jean to be. And then she became her own unique, interesting character and lives on. And then Rachel Summers, I think, is fascinating. And I love what Tini Howard's doing or has done with her. She's complicated. I think the Claremont characters, the female character, is always complicated and interesting and three-dimensional, and she's no exception to that.
Mike, were you reading X-Men at that time when you were working at first?
Yes, I was. I'm trying to remember that back. Yes, I was.
I mean, I say that, Alex, because Mike reads everything that still comes out today. Like, he's been reading comics for 60 years or more.
It's hard to shake it.
I've been reading comics for a little bit over 70 years. My sister, Bob knows the story backwards and forwards, but my sister was 7 years older than me. She was stuck babysitting me, and she hated that idea, which was the appropriate response. And so she would read me her comics while our mother wandered off to the grocery store across the street, And that's how I learned how to read. And then it's also how I learned how to steal, because I found her stash of comic books. And now I'm reading early 50s, very early 50s, Superman, Batman. I'm reading those original Archie annuals, which were, 500 pages or something. It was just an amazing plunk, and loving every one of them. I'm still a huge Bob Montana fan.
Oh yeah, Harry Lucy, DiCarlo. They had the pantheon of artists.
Dan Parent. I think is one of the more revolutionary guys working in comics, and one of the nicer guys working.
Oh yeah, he's a sweetheart,
and that says a lot. So, Bob, it's been maybe 71 years.
Well,
I've been reading comics.
So I think the interesting part about why I brought that up, first of all, I wanted to tell you, I wanted to put into the world that I love Rachel Summers, and regardless of what other people think of it. But have you ever had an experience with fans who had a negative reaction to what you had written, and how did you deal with that? I mean, is it?
I mean,
hopefully not, but I mean, have you?
Yeah, I think every writer has to varying degrees. I think at a certain point, once the book is out there, it's no longer yours. You've released it into the world, and the reader has their reaction, and you can't judge someone for reacting to the work as it exists. I mean, you can, and I also don't like to get into debates where I defend what's on the page and kind of try to talk them into liking it. I mean, if you don't like it, you don't like it. I mean, not everything I do is for everybody, and I think every writer, if you don't believe that, you probably should think about it, because it helps a lot. I don't read like Goodreads reviews. I think it's, once the work is out there, how people react to it is theirs. It's a conversation. And you mentioned this, Mike, earlier, but prose, I think it's like a pact with the reader. You're creating a pact that you're teeing up their mind's eye. You're creating the opportunity for them to make the movie in their mind. Whereas in comics, you've got the artist, and you're working with the artist to create this visual. But with prose, you're engaging with the reader, I think, directly with their imagination. And so I think there's always little things, like somebody got really mad that I killed Pete Fernandez's cat in one of the books. Like, I blew up the house, and there was just no way for the cat to survive. So I don't kill animals in books anymore because people get really upset.
Yeah,
people
I
don't,
would, although I don't want to.
right.
But excuse
Yeah.
me, but I'm a complete pussy when it comes to killing.
Yeah. I shouldn't have done it in retrospect, but you learn. That's part of the journey. So
Why do you say that? Why do you say that? Why do you say you shouldn't have done it? Because of the reaction, or because it didn't fit the story?
It just seemed a little not gratuitous. I think it just was unnecessary. Like maybe you could have had a moment where the cat like crawls out of the wreckage and you get a little. I mean, it is what it is. I stand by the book. I think it's entertaining, and sometimes houses blow up and pets don't survive. So
sure,
yeah,
or worse, we have hurricanes.
Yeah.
Horrible.
But to your question, yeah, I mean, sometimes somebody will raise an issue or a concern or not agree with a decision you made. Often it's tied to, oh, why'd you kill this character? Or, this twist was predictable. And you have to kind of give them grace. Everyone has their opinion. In the same way that when I consume art, I have opinions about whether I think it was executed well. Like you have to hope that the good outweighs the bad.
Right.
Sure.
But it differs from reader to reader.
Right. Exactly.
And there's no way you can entertain everybody or half of everybody. You kind of know that if you piss one person off in comics,
yeah,
you're going to hear about it, but you're not going to be bothered by it because they've gone away.
Yeah. Well, the shorthand I use, you can't please everyone, but the shorthand I use is that if I'm writing a book or a comic that I find entertaining, then the odds are somebody else will find it entertaining. And if you do it well in the way that, okay, this is a book that I would read if I wasn't working on it, then you're writing to yourself. And the hope is that you're not alone and that there are other people that want that kind of story as well.
Well, that's pretty much the approach that Howard Chaykin was trying to describe to us on Friday. That's how he is consuming comics that he finds to be. He grew up an enthusiast, in his words, of comics, and he doesn't find the comics that are available to be the newer ones to be something he's interested in, but the ones that he's writing is what he loves about comics. He's consuming them as he's writing them. So, and
Howard's current series is all about those cockroach capitalist publishers that I was talking about an hour ago. The Hey Kids Comics is very inside baseball, very much so. I have no idea how somebody who's just not at all familiar with the history of the medium relates to it. I'm not saying they couldn't or they shouldn't. They can and they do. But if you know how the game is played, my God, it's a whole different world.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to the idea that, a lot of creative folks work off obsession. You have to be obsessed. You have to really be driven to create these stories because that's what's going to motivate you. It's not just something you do like making the donuts. Like you have to be really invested in the story you're telling. Otherwise, there might not be any return. It might go into the void, but at least you were obsessed and you created it,
If you described somebody like Orson Welles to a normal human being who wasn't familiar with the work, they would think, oh, this guy's an asshole. Why do you want to? No,
it's not that he wasn't. Well, he was an asshole, but that's not the complete definition of him.
But he was an asshole with a sense of humor.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying anything bad about him. That doesn't mean he's not an asshole. Howard, I love Howard, but he's an asshole.
Oh, he'll be the first to tell you that.
Exactly.
Matter of fact, he may have a trademark on the word.
I appreciate that you've done this with us, Alex.
Yeah, this is
what else is coming that we may have already heard about or that we are about to hear about.
Sure. I've got a Peter Parker Spider-Man story in Marvel Zombies Black, White, and Blood, which is
Project Cryptid.
Oh yeah, Project Cryptid. It's coming out next month. I have a story in the second issue with Steve Bryant on art.
And what's that about?
It's about this kind of occult investigator named Diana Montalvan who lives in Miami, and she's approached by an old flame to help him find this missing bird, that the ivory-billed woodpecker, which he captured in Cuba, a bird that's long been thought extinct and is allegedly cursed in some way. And Diana, I wrote a story about her, a prose story in an anthology Bob Greenberger was editing, that Peter David and Keith R. A. DeCandido and a bunch of other great prose authors contributed to. And it felt like such a great fit for this anthology that I was able to bring her in and do it in comics as well. So that was fun. And Steve did a really nice job on the art. And then the Spider-Man story in the Marvel Zombies miniseries. And on the novel side, Alter Ego, which is a follow-up to Secret Identity, is hitting late next year. And that'll be set in the modern day, a different protagonist and kind of the other side of the coin. Like what happens when this obscure 1970s superhero character reappears in the modern day and is caught up in the multimedia machinery of what comics are today. The idea of like, let's make this into a TV show, let's make this into a movie. Like, grappling with that kind of fandom and that kind of idea has been fun. And then I have Dark Space, which is a sci-fi novel co-written with Rob Hart, who wrote The Warehouse, and the Daredevil novel, which will come out in 25. So busy.
That's busy.
Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
Which is it's a broad question. So, yeah, drink some water.
Yeah, get in zone.
That's right. You grew up as a member of the Cuban American community in Miami. What experiences from that what experiences from your heritage have you brought to your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think every story I've written, aside from stuff that's work for hire and completely like, licensed work, has some connection to Miami or to Cuban American culture or characters. Like Pete Fernandez is a Cuban American. Carmen Valdez in Secret Identity, she's from Miami, so she moves up to New York. Even Diana Montalvan is a Cuban American living in Miami, doing these supernatural investigations. So I think it's important. As a kid, I didn't see a lot of those stories. They didn't exist. I remember reading Spidey 2099 and being so excited because he was, Mexican Irish. I was like, okay, I could be Spider-Man maybe. But I think it really is good to have stories that represent your culture and your background, because you never know who's going to be reading them and identifying with them. I think that identification is really important.
Well, first of all, I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. Secondly, I think there's a responsibility there. Because most Americans really aren't familiar with the Cuban American experience.
Yeah.
And anybody who can get some of that across the plate into our popular culture is doing us all a service.
Yeah, and I think that applies to any, right. I think I read to learn about other people, other places, other worlds, and whether they be fictional or real. And I think that's the pleasure of reading, is the kind of the knowledge.
Have you been to Cuba?
I haven't. I'd like to go. So it's challenging.
Yes, on a lot of levels.
Yeah, exactly.
Conan O'Brien did a special from Havana a couple of years ago, and it's on streaming somewhere. Everything is. But it was fascinating, and it was fun. And we don't see Cuba as being a fascinating and fun place.
Yeah.
He revealed that part of Cuba, and I'm a better person for it. And I know a couple of people who've been to Cuba since Castro came around. So I learned positive stuff. And you've got that from your community. We all do. Yeah. It's our responsibility to bring that out.
Yeah, and I think whenever you immerse yourself in stuff like that, you realize that every issue is much more nuanced than you were first led to believe. So yeah, it's definitely on my list of things to do at some point. So
my children are of Cuban descent.
Oh yeah,
and so I have some experience with Cuban Americans and Cubans, and it is a very particular brand or culture that it has an amazing richness, and there's a lot of opinions about it. Do you get anybody claiming authenticity or saying you didn't do this right Cuban wise, or saying I see my Cubanness and stuff like you've written?
More of the latter than the former, definitely. Good. I think a lot of nice notes from people with my background or neighborhood that say, it's so great to see, a Cuban American character that's in the starring role, that's the hero, that isn't just like the comic relief or the drug dealing villain. Like you want to kind of break out of those tropes and show that, anyone can be a star of a story, because we're all the stars of our respective lives, whether we want to be or not. So
good point.
Well, I think I need to cut it short a little bit tonight, Mike. Unfortunately, I went to the doctor yesterday, and they said, "Why don't you have a shot in each arm for some stuff?" And I'm dragging here, and I
no, this has been fun. Thanks for having me.
Was it a shot for anything in particular?
Tetanus and shingles. They're like, "Oh, you need vaccines." And
I know.
I'm fine with that. I don't need. No, you need it. And I said I've had shingles. It was not fun.
Yeah, that does not sound appealing.
No.
Well, get some rest. Thanks for having me.
I do. I've loved every minute of this. This has been fantastic.
It's been good.
I would love to have you on again.
Anytime.
It's something that we all enjoy doing so much.
Alex, this was great.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm glad we got to chat.
Having lunch or dinner with you sometime, and we can tell all really nasty stories that will leak out onto the internet.
Yes,
without our fingerprints.
Yes. No, let's definitely catch up in person. And Bob, I'm sure I'll see you
soon. See you in New York.
Yeah, see you in New York. All right, guys.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. That was great.
All right, Michael. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for putting up with my whatever I've brought to this. I'm exhausted. I am exhausted. It's been a long week. And it's Tuesday.
Yes, it has. I didn't need to end it with driving through Jersey in the rain.
Yeah.
But that was okay, because I needed something to get my mind off of a wonderful convention.
Absolutely.
To clear the deck.
I want to remind everybody we will be back next week. We will not be back next week. I have something I have to do, so we're going to take a week off. I apologize for that. The weekend. What's that?
I was going like, when you said I have something I have to do, that sounds ominous.
No, I have to. It's work related stuff. I have to pay bills and stuff. So I have something that's taking me away from my joy. But the week after, we will have a guest. I'm not sure about who it is. I have a couple of ideas, and if you stay tuned to Pop Culture Squad, you'll find them. If you make sure that you any of our watchers and listeners, if you haven't already, please like and follow our YouTube page and our Facebook page, however you're watching, so you'll get notified when we go live. And well, now that you're done for the year for conventions so far, we'll
I think I am.
I think you are. I have at least one more. I have New York Comic-Con, and that should be fun.
Yeah, I'm not doing that because it's a nightmare. But
yeah, no, that's fine.
There might be a show actually when we go to Chicago, but we haven't figured out the dates and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Well, that sounds good.
All right.
Sounds great. Everybody, stay tuned to Pop Culture Squad for the latest information. We thank you for being here tonight, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, folks.
This has been a production of the Pop Culture Squad Network. PopCultureSquad.com. How do you nerd?